wanted to do something in a room that made sense and matched.
I like this.
Makes sense, yeah.
What do you think of that, that someone could walk in a room and go, it feels like Interpol? You enjoy that kind of, those kinds of reactions?
I think it says something about our music, but it says more about what our music means to the person who would say this room reminds me of Interpol.
It reminded me a little bit of, I think maybe, was it the video for Obstacle 1?
Oh yeah.
It has that kind of feeling.
It felt like Floria's framing in that room and everything.
I could see why someone would say that about the band. It feels very Interpol, but, and I'm sure we've done things that would have given them, you know, that sort of perception. But at the same time, I think us, we don't say, this is exactly the message we want to communicate to anyone who listens to our music or sees our aesthetics. I think we're a bit more open as far as evolution and change and things we might, you know, utilize.
Yeah. You know, we started off with music, and then because of the, you know, the medium that we work in, there's other kind of aspects of what you do. So there's going to be videos, there's going to be the appearance of the band, artwork of the album, things like that. That when you talk about like geometry and sort of harsh lines and black and white, I think that the music that we write is also, it's really structural like that. It's really kind of, you know, sharp edges, and emotionally I think it has that kind of melancholy impact. And if someone like you can tap into that and say this room reminds me of Interpol, I think that's great. I think it means that we kind of did manage to sort of engender a cohesive, I guess, a vibe around that's beyond the music, an aesthetic. Yeah, exactly.
Just looking at the 4 records, the band has kind of moved to a place where it's really hard to refer outside of the palette of the band. It feels like it's a world. You've created a world now. But really, it's hard to say that Interpol really sounds like any other band ever.
I like that. I remember when we first started out, we would say, like, we look forward to the time when people can, you know, relate our music, or, you know, talk about our music relative to our other music, rather than talk about our music relative to other people's music, you know?
Well, we've gotten there. Today's the day.
We've gotten there.
Now you're in an interesting place where we're back to an album that's self-titled, Interpol, and part of that was a new visual language for the band, right? A new logo, a new identity. Why a new logo?
While we were working on the music, I remember there was a time when Carlos had this idea about sequencing the album, and he had an idea about kind of, what if we sort of made some decisions about the final product while we're in the process, in the earlier stages of the process. It meant that, like, before the songs were even finished being written, the wheels were kind of turning about how we would present the whole thing. Music coupled with the idea of self-titled sort of led to this idea of some kind of monumental representation of our logo. Because if there's not going to be a title, there's not going to be other information or anything. I want it to have like a lot of impact and be sort of big and powerful. To be perfectly honest, I've been kind of geeking out on this ancient alien jibber-jabber stuff. The sort of, you know, monolithic structures and these kind of fascinating stone cuttings that are done with what appears to be like laser technology that couldn't possibly be done by civilizations without language or the wheel. And we were working with the same designer that worked on I Love to Admire with us, this guy David Calderley, who's excellent. He really got the concept immediately, and then he sort of developed, you know, the actual visual that you see. I made a point of saying whatever it is that we do, it needs to be slow, because this is a vast, you know, Leviathan thing. This is a real thing floating in space.
Would you describe the record as also this big Leviathan?
I like to think all of our records have an eternal feel to them. Yeah. I mean, and I think all of our records, you know, since the beginning, people have always said that it took me a few listens to get into it. We're not necessarily like a first listen band. And I think this record in particular might not be a first listen record. If you listen to it once, you might have one interpretation, and you might not necessarily have the same one you're going to have after 4 or 5 listens entirely.
Would you call the record kind of like a play in 10 acts?
I like that. I remember.
Do you?
I like side A, side B maybe more.
Okay.
I think we basically kind of abided by the same rules that we've always had, which is make an album the way you want to make it, start to a finish, what makes sense, pacing and everything like that, and have a story to tell. And it's ambitious in the sense that we live in an ADD society, so if you don't make something really easy that people can catch on right from the beginning, they might just not catch on at all.
production process? How did it work? Like, how did the songs come to be?
I mean, it's always kind of half crazy, you know, artistic ideas, and like
Sure,
even when
yeah.
we were talking about the logo and the kind of eternal thing, it's not that pretentious. It's just that, you know, you're gonna evoke things with your artwork, so you might as well evoke great things
Right.
if it fits with what you want to do.
And then recording the record in different pieces and layering it. Was that part of the recording process or part of Alan's mixing process, or obviously maybe a combination of
both.
the two?
I think, but even the sequencing, I think I was even a little bit resistant at first, because it's like, I don't want to commit to this before we know what these songs are going to sound like. It feels like you have to sign a contract. But then after a while, like Paul's saying, it becomes something you start internalizing it and thinking about it, and then you're like, okay, then it becomes like the goal that you're trying to meet. And then after a while, it's like a good thing to try to make happen while you're in the process of creating it, recording it, and there's a joy to it when it all does come together.
When you work with a band like Interpol that have a defined sound, my job is to try and realise what they've recorded and what's in their heads. I tend to get to work with a lot of bands that like that big wall of sound, and Paul had really done an amazing job doing all his vocal arrangements, and they're really sophisticated and really poppy, which kind of went against the slightly less poppy arrangements of the song. I'd say this record is more of an extension of their sound rather than a new direction. It's still very Interpol sounding, but because Carlos had put a lot of orchestration on it, I think that gave it a different depth and different dynamic to their other records. And the vocal arrangement, I think, was something that was a bit more sophisticated and almost R&B in it, the way Paul had worked it out.
Alan says that the vocals were very sophisticated and a little bit R&B, what you were doing with the songs and the vocals.
Well, we broke down on R. Kelly a little bit in the studio. He's also a fan.
You're a fan, yeah. You're a big fan of hip hop.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really know. It had never crossed my mind either that there was an R&B thing. I always finish the vocals after we've done all the music, and so I'm always mindful of what, you know, the cadence of the bass and the drums is, and I'm always trying to weave it in with the bass and the drums in specific. What I think happens in a band like ours is every individual member of the collective sort of evolves independent of the others, you know, in life and as artists, and individually try to outdo themselves relative to their previous work. On this record, you know, Carlos had real pointed things he wanted to accomplish that were really about him as an artist, like what he wanted to bring and how he wanted to evolve. Sam I think, evolves on his own, you know, in between album cycles, and comes back with his new kind of, you know, ammo. And I think everybody does that, and the reason why it sort of stays this cohesive aesthetic is because it all stems from Daniel's original guitar progressions, and I think that's the touchstone that keeps all of us who are trying to evolve in our own way. That's what keeps it having that feeling of it being an extension of Interpol, I think.
But when Alan Mulder says something like, oh, there's like almost like something reminiscent of R&B in Paul's vocals, that isn't a surprise to me, or anyone saying about R&B in our music or this and that, because, you know, what's kind of motivated us and driven our songs is really just inspiration and need as artists to like do something rather than like, because we're in a rock band, this is what we do and we have to put out rock songs.
They have a sound, and that's what I love about them.
Okay, let's talk about Lights. How did it become the first single, and is it even a first single?
It wasn't really a first single, it was more of our first thread of communication in years to anyone who wanted to listen to us. This is before we had a record label deal, so this is way before a single, before we had any release date or any idea of when the record would be coming out. So it was really like a really pure moment at that. Let's just put something out there. Let's take advantage of this age and let's see what happens. And then within that same conversation, we started talking about, well, it'd be cool to do a film clip to go flights. Within that, we settled on doing something with Charlie White, who we'd worked with on the Evil video, and Paul's the one who spoke to him, the initial conversation.
Interestingly, we talked to him, but he didn't want to be on camera, so we did an audio-only interview with him. But I think maybe that's how you interacted with him mostly.
Yeah.
So
I
can you
haven't met him in
explain?
person.
So you've never met Charlie White?
I don't think so, not in person, no.
No. Yeah.
No.
So
I wouldn't guess it by talking on the phone, because he's like pretty good conversation.
Very relaxed, yeah.
Very relaxed, very funny, and like very attentive.
I think he just wants to exist as a voice.
There's a piece in the New York Times a friend forwarded me on him, actually, and there's photos of him, and they show you at his house with his wife, and yeah, he's a normal guy.
Okay.
Maybe it's humor.
He doesn't want to meet me. But so his initial concept was black on black on black.
Really?
That's what he says.
Oh, that makes sense.
That's
No,
what
that
he
makes
said in
sense.
his
Yeah.
interview.
Yeah.
That was the first image that he had.
Yep.
You know, and why does that make sense to you?
Well, I mean, the way that it went is I had an idea, actually, for what I wanted that video to be. You know, I had a treatment in mind and sort of concepts. So I called Charlie to discuss, and he's like, yeah, I heard your idea. Yeah, I'm not going to do that, but I have this other idea, and it's, you know, it's really got this beetle in it, and, you know, like there's this process and biological this and that.
So the biggest challenge is my insistence they're not going to be in it. You know, that undermines many of the things that a fan might want, because they want to see them, and they want to see them perform. I'm interested in kind of pursuing that thing outside of the performance and outside of the image of the band.
It was cool just because his enthusiasm really trumped my idea. It felt like, okay, if you've got this great artist that we know we like working with, and we've worked with him before, and we loved what he did, and he's inspired by the song, and he's got a vision, you know, okay, let's just let him go do exactly what he sees.
In discussing it with Paul by phone, I just kind of explained to him the general aesthetic and how it was inspired by, first thing, introducing their kind of return. I started to build a concept that literally was black on black on black. That's it. That's where I'm starting from. And it's going to go into this space, and it's going to have a quality that's very much like sci-fi. I'm going to do something where I'm going to regard a three-horned rhinoceros beetle. Why that? Well, the reason why is, just look at it. It's kind of an aesthetic foundation in and of itself. It's this incredible, beautiful black beetle, and it has all of this kind of visual potential. And in not having the beetle there and kind of opening up in a kind of cinematic narrative way, it starts to really expand the potential of what the story kind of could be. The track offered a lot in all of its complexity because it doesn't have many transitions. It's just one long preparation to that end point. From Paul, there's so much of an erotic in not just what he says, but how he says it, or that the way the music builds becomes a kind of erotic experience. What I wanted to create in terms of introducing a kind of guild of workers, which became the two courtesans, and then generate this kind of ritual with this third figure that would go through a process, disrobing and preparing the body, and then taking the body into another chamber. She'd have kind of an engagement with a black form, a black object. And for me, in a way, that's my favorite part, that you have something so wholly abstract happening in the song, and you know, for the person who kind of puts one and one together to make two, they're like, oh wait, I know where that comes from. That's inspired by the original motion animation. I think that lights, as time goes by, will again be a certain benchmark where an expression is made that is more of a compendium to the song than a visualization of them performing the song.
When you saw the finished thing, what was your initial reaction?
I loved it. I really did. And I thought it was, more slow-paced than videos normally are. And, it was really about you had to get into the language he was speaking with the visuals and just go at the pace that it was going at.
So what does the line mean? That's why I hold you.
Well, I mean...
Is there a story?
No, there's not a story.
But in the context of the record.
I mean, that was a song where I had most of those vocals written except for the line that you're talking about. And the line that you're talking about was the last minute, it just kind of...
It just came out.
Yeah, it just came out. It really... There's many times, and I'm trying to get better at doing this, but really unconscious composition, like your subconscious or whatever, where you're just not... and you can get away with that kind of thing when you're doing music. You can't get away with that in other medium. Where there's melody involved, ideas can just come and you can do them because you just know in that moment that it's the right thing. So that was one of those.
There's, sense of loss and darkness and despair. But there's always these moments of like holding on to people or things or wanting to be better or, it's a kind of classic, redemption.
Well, lyrically, there's more humility on this record, and there's like even kind of vulnerability verging on the pathetic, in some of the narrative positions, which is different.
You are now embarking on an exploration of visual experience tied to your music. So with the Creators Project, you're going to start, collaborating on something that becomes some kind of visual extension of the band. What's your hope and ambition out of the collaboration?
I think, when you couple visuals or situations with music, it's always been, there's a profound impact, it's whether it's you're riding in your car and you're listening to your favorite song and the scenery somehow becomes the movie and the song is a soundtrack, or even just walking down the street, there's a great, great interaction between experience and music. And within this form, it's an exciting thing to go and explore.
The work, whatever it becomes, it will have its world premiere at Coachella. Do you have any ambitions on like making or exploring something new in the outdoor festival environment?
The prospect of it is like super intriguing. I think just for a festival site, it's not something you see too often. It's just what it might be is like to be determined. So I guess
it's going to be like Burning Man meets Tron. I'm predicting it right now.
That's what we've been saying. Huh?
That's what it's going to be.
That's kind of cool, actually. Okay, thanks for talking.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate it.